We're going to be multiplying and dividing decimals by a power of 10. Our goal is to multiply and divide whole numbers and decimals by powers of 10 using your previous knowledge of place value. Place value, of course, is where the decimal is. In this lesson, you will learn to divide whole numbers and decimals by powers of 10 and connecting it to your previous understanding of multiplying by 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, 1 million, etc. Let's first look at one example. How would you write 2 8/10 times 10? Well, you can use the old-fashioned way of multiplying up and down and multiply 0 times 8, 0 times 2, hold my spot, 1 times 8, 1 times 2, add them together and get 280, move my decimal over one spot and get 28. Or there's a trick when multiplying by powers of 10. First, count the zeros. I have 10, which is another word for 10 to the first power. So that would be 1 0. Start at the decimal. Now when multiplying, you move right. That way. So move to your right, however many zeros you see. So we have start at the decimal, move right one spot. So that would be, of course, sorry, I moved that 0. It would be 28. So that's a shortcut in finding multiplication of a power of 10. Thing to remember about multiplication, always move to the right. So my question, of course, is how would you write 2 8/10 times 10 to the 4th power? Well, you don't have to multiply out 10 to the 4th power, which of course is 10 times 10 times 10 times 10. Remember those exponents, because there's a trick with that as well. 10 to the 4th power, write your 1, and then count the power, which is 4, and that means you're going to have 4 zeros. So that's the same as 2 8/10 times 10,000. Now when we do that, we can write 2 8/10, and we can just count our exponent and move it 4 places. Now, we start at the decimal, and if we don't have anything in those extra spaces, we add zeros. So I moved it 1, 2, 3, 4, which is 28,000. And remember, when multiplying, always move to the right. Multiply to your right. How do you write 67 43/100 multiplied by 10 to the 5th power? Well, again, we need to look at, well, if it's to the 5th power, that means it's 5 zeros after the 1. So I'm going to start with 67 43/100. And it's multiplying, so multiply to the right. I'm going to move the decimal 5 spots. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So when I rewrite that number, 67 43/100, I can move my decimal 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 places. And to fill those empty places, I can put zeros. So 67 43/100 multiplied by 10 to the 5th power is 6,743,000. So you can see how that was so much easier than changing my exponents to standard form and then multiplying everything out. We're using place value to create a shortcut. Now we're going to look at how do we do that for division. Well, we know that multiplication and division are inverse properties. So I move to the right when it's multiplication. For division, where do you think you're going to do? Where do you think you're going to go? take a minute to think about it. Remember, multiplication and division are inverse operations. So let's look at two division problems. So how do we write 2 and 8/10 divided by 10? Instead of multiplying by 10, we're going to divide by 10. Well, again, I can say 2 and 8/10 divided by 10. Of course, I can see, well, 10 can go into 2 0 times. 10 can go into 28 2 times. 2 times 10 is 20. Subtract. I have an 8. I have to add a 0 because my decimal is still going. 10 can go into 80 8 times. And now I have no remainder. So I know that this is 28 hundredths. Now, of course, we know that when we multiply, we go to the right. And when we divide, that means we are going to go to the left. And we have one space after the 0. And notice if we move the decimal one space to the left, because we have 1 0, one space to the left, we also get 28 hundredths. So that's another shortcut that we have. Multiplication also works with division, but instead of moving the decimal, starting with the decimal, instead of moving it to the right, you move it to the left. So my question is, of course, how do you write 2 and 8/10 divided by 10 to the third power, which is another word for 1,000? Well, I can start, again, to the third power just means 3 zeros. So I can start with my decimal, start with your place, and I can move it 1, 2, 3. 3 places to the left because it's division. So, of course, the same thing happens where I put zeros for my placeholders. So I have 2 and 8/10, 1, 2, 3. This is where I'm ending, 3 spaces, and I need to fill my empty spots with zeros. So that gives me 0 and 28 hundred thousandths. Sorry, 28 ten thousandths. So that gives me 28 ten thousandths. Let's look at another example. How do you write 32 and 4 hundredths? Sorry, that should be a division sign, which I've changed for you. How do you write 32 and 4 hundredths divided by 10 to the second power? So again, we start at the decimal, which is right after the 2, and now it's division, so division is to the left. When you divide, it's to the left instead of the right with multiplication. And I know that I have 2 spots, so it's 1, 2. So that's 3,204 10,000ths. So 32 and 4 hundredths divided by 10 to the second power, or divided by 100, is 3,204 10,000ths. So I hope that helps you out. A common mistake to look out for is students will move the decimal in the wrong direction. So something that you really always need to ask yourself is, when I move the decimal to the right for multiplication, remember the number should be getting bigger because you're adding repeatedly. When we add repeatedly, the number should get bigger. So when we move the decimal to the right, we're multiplying. And when we move the decimal to the left, we're making the number smaller. Remember division, repeated subtraction, so we're making the number smaller. Those are 2 things to keep in mind when you're double checking your work. Make sure you're moving the decimal to the right for multiplication and to the left for division. So another really great job today. Make sure that you are always double checking your work to make sure that you've gone the right direction. Again, avoid those common mistakes. And I hope that these shortcuts for multiplying by powers of 10 and dividing by powers of 10 can help you. 10, 20, remember the rules are similar, just multiply by 2 and move a 0. So those will of course be in other lessons. We'll look at other shortcuts. But powers of 10 are really going to help save you time. Good job.